Really been quite a busy year, hasn't it? Not just here in South Africa, but around the entire African continent. If we're talking about Islamic insurgencies in Mozambique, also Ethiopia, conflict between rebel forces in the Tigray region as well, government forces and the Tigray rebels. Nigeria continuing to deal with rebels and bandits, that coup in Sudan, also seeing mass pro-democracy protests, and never mind, of course, a number of elections, and most notably the re-election of Yoweri Museveni in Uganda. And I, if you paid attention, have even mentioned COVID-19 and the vaccine rollout. So where in the world do we put together a highlights reel, Thembisa Fakude from Africa-Asia Dialogues, of what stands out for you in Africa this year, joining us from a beautiful background of Port Edward this morning. So what's the one standout for you? If you have to write one chapter of your 2021 Africa book, what do you start with?
I think Ethiopia will remain because of what has happened in a promising government of Abiy Ahmed, who the previous year won a Nobel Peace Prize, and this year, or from 2020, started experiencing that internal insurgence. So Ethiopia will be the main country for me for 2020 in Africa that has caught a spotlight.
I can't help but imagine perhaps a little bit closer to home, not to suggest Ethiopia isn't important, but I think just because of our proximity to Mozambique, for me what stood out is the Islamic insurgency. It seems that Africa wasn't really paying as much attention to it as they should have, and Mozambique, of course, as we know, are our neighbours.
Yes, Mozambique was indeed, but it's also a very misunderstood conflict, because it was it was quickly given that low-hanging narrative that there is an Islamic insurgent, without necessarily looking at the internal concerns and grievances, and why those people, whether they're Muslims or not, why those people in Mozambique decided to take arms. So it is still not a well-understood conflict. Many people have, as I've said, taken a low-hanging interpretation of that by just associating it with an Islamic insurgence, but there are much more deeper socio-economic issues in Mozambique, which many people argue have triggered the current standoff we find in that country.
I also can't help but think that Sudan getting a bit of a bad rap, not just this year, but over the past few years, some extreme critics saying you can't mention the country Sudan without mentioning the word coup in the same sentence. And is that a fair assessment? It seems a little harsh to me.
Well, in the past 3 years, we've had 3 coups. Two proper coups. The second one is in inverted commas, of course, and an attempted coup in Sudan. So it's correct for those who want to give it that interpretation. But it's again a sad situation in Sudan, that you have military once again forming the Sovereign Council, which is a governing council consisting both of the civilians and the military. And Umar al-Bashir is still in prison waiting for his day, at least at The Hague, but in Sudan the process has started taking place. The biggest question, of course, is that the current 2 most important leaders in Sudan, Abdel Fattah Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, were part of the al-Bashir regime. So what's going to happen to them now that they've assumed a leadership role and position in Sudan? So it's quite an interesting politicking as well taking place in that country.
I'm going to ask you which is the story that you're looking out for, which country you're looking out for the most in 2022, Thembisa. But before I get to that, I want to get your thoughts as well on Nigeria. The problem, of course, Nigeria, one of the economic powerhouses, excuse me, on the continent, but still dealing with rebels, insurgents and bandits, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Nigeria's biggest challenge is the unfair distribution of services. You have the people in the north, particularly Muslim north, feeling that they are shortchanged in terms of the government distributing services in that country. And then you have other people in the Niger Delta who also feel that they are sitting on top of the food chain, but they're not benefiting, because most of the oil reserves come from that part of the world, but they're not benefiting. So there's only a few elite sitting in the capital of Nigeria, Abuja, and other parts of Nigeria who are benefiting, including cities like Lagos. But those that feel that the natural reserves are underneath their feet still feel deprived. So it's going to be a challenging year for the Nigerians again, moving forward, notwithstanding, of course, that they're trying very hard to resuscitate their economy. They've introduced something called the eNaira, if you remember, which is a new currency that they want to start using, mainly taking advantage of the online economy that is taking place, the cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I was about to say that reminds me of the cryptocurrency story. I think it's what you're talking about as well. Can we talk about what this year was like before I let you go, and next year, COVID-19, especially vaccinations and how the world viewed Africa, not exactly favorably for Africa this year. Do you see it the same way I do, and do you think it's going to be the same problems next year for vaccines in Africa? It almost feels like we were a little left behind, wasn't it?
Well, I think so. I think the challenge will continue of distributing of the COVID vaccines. But South Africa has since donated 2 million doses of J&J to other African countries. We still don't know which countries are going to benefit from that. So that's going to be the problem. But I think the biggest challenge will be convincing people to vaccinate, given all the tales that are told around vaccination, etc. And I think governments around Africa in general are not doing enough in convincing the African populace that it is the right thing to do, and there are no threats to their health or manhood. In some instances, they can go ahead and vaccinate. But I think for me, the most important thing, the story that will happen next year, even though I guess in South Africa it might have a little bit of hype, will be the national conference of the ANC once again, which is likely to take place in 2022. We haven't been given dates, but 5 years is in December next year since the last election of Cyril Ramaphosa. So I think that's going to be the story that at least will dominate the South African headlines.
And perhaps as I let you go on that story, I was going to ask you about how Africa should have been reacting to other European countries locking us out and putting us on red lists. But maybe let me ask you this as a last question, Thembisa, because you raised it. It's a good point. How damaging and how difficult is it going to be for ANC leadership next year off the back of what we saw with the local government elections this year? There's a lot of work to do, isn't there?
Well, there's going to be a lot of work to do, but I think brand Cyril Ramaphosa will win the day for the ANC. It's not going to necessarily be the wisdom of the collective, but this time around I think Cyril Ramaphosa is riding on a much more higher ticket and is likely to retain power. And brand Cyril Ramaphosa will benefit even those that are going to be in his slate, because the ANC continues to use slate politicking to gain or retain power. So that's what's going to be happening next year in the ANC election. I'm not claiming to be an expert on ANC, but based on what I've observed over the years, I think that's what's going to happen. The brand Cyril will be the most important and powerful brand that will win the day for the ANC come election in the national conference next year.